Welcome to True Horror Stories for Sleep. If this is your first time here, this channel is dedicated to real encounters, unsolved mysteries, and chilling experiences told in a calm, slow-paced way, perfect for late-night listening. Tonight, we begin our journey with 5 unsettling horror stories. Stories whispered by real people who swear these moments still follow them even now. So, before we begin, get comfortable, dim the lights. Let your room settle into silence. As the world outside grows quieter, the things hidden in the dark become easier to hear. Relax, breathe, and allow your mind to drift. Because once the stories begin, sleep may come, but peace might not. This is True Horror Stories for Sleep. The Maplewood Psychiatric Hospital, some places just feel wrong. I don't mean uncomfortable or creepy in that fun Halloween kind of way. I mean wrong on a fundamental level, like every cell in your body is screaming at you to leave. The Maplewood Psychiatric Hospital was one of those places. This happened back in October of 2019. I was 23, working a dead-end job at a call center, and spending my weekends doing urban exploration with my buddy Marcus. We'd been exploring abandoned buildings for about 2 years at that point. Old factories, churches, schools, you name it. We always went during the day, always told someone where we'd be, and we never vandalized anything. We weren't there to cause trouble. We just wanted to document these forgotten places before they were demolished or collapsed on their own. Maplewood had been on our list for months. The hospital shut down in 1987 after multiple scandals involving patient mistreatment. It sat empty for over 30 years, slowly being reclaimed by nature. The property was massive, about 15 acres, surrounded by a rusted chain-link fence that had more holes than metal at this point. The main building was this imposing Victorian-era structure, 4 stories tall with 2 wings stretching out like arms. We arrived around 10 a.m. on a Saturday. Perfect weather for exploring. Overcast but not raining, cool but not cold. Marcus parked his truck about a quarter-mile down the road, and we hiked in through the woods that bordered the property. We'd learned early on that parking right outside abandoned buildings was a good way to attract attention from cops or security. The fence was easy enough to slip through. We found ourselves standing in what used to be the hospital's front lawn. The grass had grown wild, reaching past our knees in places. There were these ancient oak trees scattered around, their branches twisted and gnarled, casting shadows that seemed too dark for the amount of light we had that day. The front entrance was boarded up, but we'd done our research. Around back, there was a loading dock with a door that had been pried open by previous explorers. We made our way around the building, our footsteps crunching on gravel and broken glass. The windows on the ground floor were either boarded up or broken, the glass lying in jagged patterns on the ground below. When we reached the loading dock, I felt the first real twinge of unease. The door was open just like we'd expected, but it was completely dark inside. Not dim, not shadowy, dark. Like the kind of darkness that seems to have weight to it. Marcus pulled out his flashlight and I did the same, clicking mine on and pointing it through the doorway. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating a concrete hallway stretching ahead of us. The walls were that industrial green color you see in old institutions, paint peeling off in long strips. There was debris everywhere, old papers, pieces of broken furniture, chunks of ceiling tile. "You ready?" Marcus asked. I nodded, even though I wasn't sure I was. But we'd come all this way, and I wasn't about to chicken out over a feeling. We stepped inside. The smell hit us immediately. It wasn't the musty, moldy smell you'd expect from an abandoned building. There was something else underneath it, something I couldn't quite identify. Sweet but rotten, like flowers left too long in a vase. I pulled my shirt up over my nose and kept moving. The hallway led us to what must have been the main corridor of the ground floor. It stretched in both directions, lined with doors. Most were closed, but a few stood open, revealing glimpses of empty rooms beyond. Our flashlights bounced off walls and floors as we walked, the beams creating dancing shadows that made it hard to focus on any one thing. We decided to work our way through the ground floor systematically, checking each room. The first few were administrative offices, desks still in place, filing cabinets tipped over, papers scattered everywhere. In one office I found a coffee mug still sitting on a desk, the liquid inside long since evaporated to a dark stain at the bottom. There was something deeply unsettling about that mug, about how mundane it was. Someone had been drinking coffee here, probably complaining about their workday, with no idea that one day the whole place would just stop. We moved deeper into the building. The rooms started to change. Patient rooms, small and cramped with peeling paint and barred windows. In one, there was still a bed frame bolted to the floor, the mattress long since removed or rotted away. I ran my light over the walls and noticed something that made my stomach turn, scratch marks. Deep gouges in the plaster, concentrated around the door and window like someone had been trying desperately to claw their way out. Jesus, Marcus muttered behind me. He'd seen them too. We found more as we explored. Room after room showed signs of distress, more scratch marks, some with what looked like dried blood in the grooves, though I tried to convince myself it was just rust or dirt. In one room, someone had written on the walls in what I hoped was charcoal, "Help me," repeated over and over, the letters getting smaller and more frantic as they spiraled into the corner. About an hour into our exploration, we found the stairs to the second floor. The stairwell was pitch black, our flashlight beams barely making a dent in the darkness. Each step creaked under our weight, and I found myself moving slower, testing each stair before putting my full weight on it. The last thing I wanted was to crash through rotten wood and break my leg in this place. The second floor was worse than the first. The air felt heavier somehow, harder to breathe. That sweet rotten smell was stronger here, making my eyes water. The hallway stretched out before us, longer than it should have been. I know that sounds crazy, but I'm telling you, it felt wrong. Like the perspective was off somehow, like we were looking at it through a distorted lens. We started checking rooms again. More patient rooms, more signs of suffering. In one, we found restraints still attached to a bed frame, the leather straps cracked and brittle with age. In another, there was a chair facing the corner, as if someone had been made to sit there as punishment. The back of the chair had claw marks too. That's when we heard it. A sound from somewhere deeper in the building. A dragging sound like something heavy being pulled across the floor. We both froze, our flashlights pointed in the direction of the sound. It came again, louder this time. Drag, pause, drag, pause. Probably just the building settling, Marcus said, but his voice was tight. He didn't believe it any more than I did. We should have left then. I know that now. But in the moment, curiosity overrode common sense. We moved toward the sound, our flashlights sweeping back and forth across the hallway. The dragging sound continued, always seeming to be just around the next corner, just beyond our vision. We turned a corner and found ourselves in a different section of the hospital. Hospital tiles, the kind you'd see in an operating room or morgue. Many were cracked or missing, revealing the concrete beneath. The dragging sound stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the noise. It was total oppressive. Even the ambient sounds you don't normally notice, the creak of old buildings, the whistle of wind through broken windows, everything had stopped. It was like the entire hospital was holding its breath. Then we heard the footsteps, not dragging this time, walking. Slow, deliberate footsteps coming from the hallway we just left, coming toward us. Marcus grabbed my arm. We need to go. Now. We didn't run at first. We backed up, keeping our lights pointed at the corner where the hallway turned. The footsteps kept coming, steady and unhurried. Step, step, step. I don't know what I expected to see when whatever it was rounded that corner, but nothing appeared. The footsteps continued, getting louder, getting closer, but there was nothing there. Just empty hallway and our flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. We bolted down the hallway, our footsteps echoing off the tiles. Behind us, those other footsteps, the ones belonging to nothing we could see, kept pace. Sometimes they seemed to fall behind, sometimes they seemed to get closer, but they never stopped. We burst through a door into what looked like a common room. There were overturned chairs, a TV that had been smashed, windows covered with wire mesh. There were 2 other doors leading out, but we couldn't remember which way we'd come in. The building had become a maze, and panic was making it hard to think straight. Marcus chose the door on the left, and we ran through it. Another hallway, this one darker than the others. Our flashlights seemed dimmer somehow, like the batteries were dying even though they'd been fresh when we arrived. The beams barely reached a few feet ahead of us now. The footsteps behind us had multiplied. At least 3 different sets now, maybe more, all walking at that same measured pace. And underneath them I could hear something else. Breathing. Ragged, wet breathing, like someone with fluid in their lungs. We found a stairwell, whether it was the same one we'd come up or a different one, I couldn't tell. We practically fell down the stairs in our rush to get to the ground floor. I scraped my hand on the wall, felt the sting of broken skin, but I didn't slow down. At the bottom of the stairs, we burst through a door and found ourselves somewhere. Not the ground floor loading dock where we'd entered. Not any place we'd been before, it was another hallway, but this one was different. The walls were covered in something dark and organic looking like mold, but worse. It seemed to pulse in the beam of our flashlights, expanding and contracting like it was breathing. Where the hell are we? Marcus's voice was high and tight with panic. The footsteps had stopped. So had the breathing. But the silence was worse because now we could hear something else. Whispers. Dozens of voices, all talking at once. Too quiet to make out individual words, but loud enough to know they were there. They seemed to come from the walls themselves, from that pulsing black growth. A door ahead of us stood open. Beyond it, I could see daylight, real, actual daylight. Without discussing it, we both ran for it. The whispers got louder as we moved, rising to a crescendo that made my ears hurt and my head pound. I felt something brush against my back, something cold and wet that soaked through my jacket. We exploded through that door into the daylight, and I've never been so happy to feel fresh air on my face. We were outside, standing in the overgrown yard, the fence visible maybe 100 yards away. We didn't stop running until we were through that fence, into the woods, and back at Marcus's truck. We sat there for maybe 10 minutes, both of us breathing hard, neither of us speaking. Finally, Marcus started the engine, and we drove away. We didn't talk about what happened for the entire drive back. What was there to say? It wasn't until we got back to my apartment that we noticed something. I took off my jacket, the one I'd felt something touch while we were running out, and we both stared at it. There was a handprint on the back, a perfect detailed handprint in what looked like ash or soot. But here's the thing that made my blood run cold. The hand that made that print had 6 fingers. I threw the jacket away that night. Burned it in my building's dumpster and watched until there was nothing left but smoke and ash. Marcus and I never went urban exploring again. We both agreed, without ever really discussing it, that some places are abandoned for a reason. Some doors shouldn't be opened. Some darkness is better left unexplored. I still think about Maplewood sometimes, usually late at night when I can't sleep. I think about those footsteps that had no source, those whispers in the walls, that handprint with too many fingers. But mostly, I think about the moment when our flashlights started to dim, when the darkness seemed to grow thicker and more solid. Because here's what I've never told anyone, not even Marcus. In that last hallway when we were running for the exit, I looked back, just for a second, and I saw them, dozens of figures standing in the darkness behind us, watching us go. They didn't move, didn't speak. They just stood there in the shadows, their faces pale blurs in the darkness, their eyes reflecting our flashlight beams like animals in the night. And every single one of them was smiling. I haven't been back to that part of the state since. I don't plan to ever go back, but sometimes, late at night, I hear footsteps in my apartment building's hallway. Slow, measured footsteps that stop outside my door. And I lie in bed, perfectly still, barely breathing, waiting for them to move on. They always do, eventually. But one night they won't. And I think I'll know when that night comes, because I'll hear it. That wet, ragged breathing, those whispers in the walls. And I'll know that whatever was in Maplewood Psychiatric Hospital, whatever was watching us from the shadows, has finally found its way home. I used to think ghosts, if they existed at all, would be obvious. Transparent figures floating through walls, chains rattling, that sort of thing. The movies make it seem so clear-cut, so dramatic. But after what happened at the Fairmont Hotel, I learned that the supernatural doesn't announce itself with special effects. It creeps in slowly, subtly, until you're so deep in it that you can't tell what's real anymore. The Fairmont was a grand hotel in its day. Built in 1924, it was the jewel of downtown during the Roaring '20s. 7 stories of Art Deco elegance with a ballroom that hosted governors and movie stars. But like a lot of places, it declined over the decades. By the 1970s, it had become a cheap residential hotel, the kind of place where people went when they had nowhere else to go. It closed for good in 1991 after a fire on the 4th floor killed 3 residents. I found out about it through an online forum for urban explorers. Someone posted photos of the lobby, the grand staircase, the chandelier still hanging despite decades of neglect, the front desk with room keys still on their hooks. It looked incredible, and I knew I had to see it in person. This was March of 2021. I was 28, working from home due to the pandemic, and going stir-crazy from the isolation. Urban exploration had become my escape, my way of getting out and doing something that felt adventurous. I'd been doing solo trips for about 6 months at that point, and I'd gotten comfortable with it. I actually preferred going alone, no one to rush me, no one to compromise with on which areas to explore. I drove out to the hotel on a Thursday afternoon. It was located in what had once been the heart of downtown, but was now mostly abandoned buildings and empty lots. The hotel itself was cordoned off with a chain-link fence, but like most urban exploration sites, people had already cut holes in it. I found one around the back, near the old parking garage, and slipped through. The building was imposing up close. 7 stories of brick and concrete, windows dark and empty like dead eyes. The Art Deco detailing was still visible, geometric patterns carved into the stone, decorative metalwork around the entrance. But it was all crumbling now, reclaimed by decay and graffiti. The main entrance was chained shut, but I'd done my research. There was a service entrance on the east side that could be jimmied open. It took me about 5 minutes of work with a crowbar I'd brought for that purpose, and then I was in. I found myself in a service corridor, concrete floors and plain walls. It was dark, but my flashlight and the daylight coming through broken windows was enough to see by. The air was thick with dust and smelled like mildew and something else, something chemical that I couldn't identify. Probably asbestos or lead paint or any number of toxic things that old buildings contain. I made my way toward the main lobby, following the corridor as it opened up into a larger space. And then I was there, standing in what had once been the crown jewel of the hotel. The photos I'd seen online hadn't done it justice. The lobby was massive, with a vaulted ceiling at least 30 feet high. The grand staircase swept up to the second floor, its marble steps chipped and cracked, but still intact. The chandelier, God, that chandelier, hung from the center of the ceiling, dusty and dim, but still beautiful, crystal drops catching the weak sunlight that filtered through the dirty windows. The front desk was exactly where it should be, a long wooden counter with cubbyholes behind it for room keys and mail. I walked over and shined my light on it. Sure enough, there were still keys hanging there. Room 203, room 415, room 602. I reached out to touch one, feeling the cold metal under my fingers, wondering about the last person who'd stayed in room 203, what their life had been like. That's when I noticed something odd. The dust on the counter had been disturbed, not everywhere, just in one specific spot. It looked like someone had laid their hand down, leaving a perfect impression of a palm and 5 fingers. But here's what made me pause. The dust around it was thick, undisturbed. If someone had made that handprint recently, there would be footprints, other disturbances, but there was nothing. Just that one handprint, sitting there like it had been made in the dust years ago and nothing had touched it since. I took a photo of it. I always documented the interesting things I found, and moved on. I spent the next hour exploring the ground floor, the restaurant with tables still set up and a menu board on the wall listing prices from 1990. The bar with bottles still on the shelves, though any liquid had long since evaporated. A reading room with built-in shelves and a fireplace, the mantel carved with intricate designs. Eventually, I decided to head upstairs. I wanted to see the rooms, get a feel for what it had been like to stay here. The grand staircase seemed stable enough, so I started climbing, my footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness of the lobby. The second floor was a long hallway with rooms on either side. The carpet was rotted in places, peeling back to reveal the wooden floor beneath. Wallpaper hung in strips revealing multiple layers. Apparently the hotel had been redecorated several times over the years. Room doors stood open or ajar, and I went down the hall systematically, checking each one. The rooms were small and depressing. Single beds with stained mattresses, small dressers, tiny bathrooms. These weren't the grand suites of the hotel's glory days. These were the rooms from its final incarnation as a residential hotel, when it housed people who had nowhere else to go. In room 217, I found something that stopped me cold. The room was like the others, small, sparse, decaying. But on the wall, someone had written a message in what looked like black marker. "I'm still here." The handwriting was shaky, uneven. Below it, in smaller letters, room 438 helped me. I stood there, staring at it, trying to make sense of it. Was this just graffiti from another urban explorer? Some kind of joke or art project? But something about it felt wrong. The handwriting was too desperate, too genuine. And it was old. The marker had faded significantly, and there was dust on the wall that suggested it had been there for years. Room 438. 4th floor. The floor where the fire had happened. I should have left then. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to turn around, go back down those stairs, and get out of the building. But I didn't. I'm not sure why. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the challenge of it, the need to prove to myself that I wasn't scared. Maybe I was just an idiot. I found the stairwell and started climbing to the 4th floor. The stairs were darker here, the windows on the landings broken or boarded up. My flashlight beam bounced off walls covered in graffiti and water stains. The higher I climbed, the colder it got. By the time I reached the 4th floor landing, I could see my breath in the beam of my flashlight. The door to the 4th floor hallway was closed. I had to put my shoulder into it to get it open. The frame was warped, and the door had swollen with moisture. It finally gave way with a loud crack that echoed through the stairwell. The smell hit me immediately. Smoke. Old smoke, the kind that soaks into everything and never really goes away. But it wasn't just a lingering smell from the fire 30 years ago. It smelled fresh, like something had been burning recently. The 4th floor hallway was in worse shape than the others. The ceiling was partially collapsed in places, and I could see blackened beams from the fire damage. The walls were scorched, paint bubbled, and peeling. Water damage had created strange patterns on what was left of the wallpaper, patterns that almost looked like faces if you looked at them right. I found room 438 about halfway down the hall. The door was closed, and unlike the others I'd seen, it looked intact. No water damage, no graffiti. Just a plain door with the number 438 in tarnished brass digits. I reached for the doorknob. It was ice cold, so cold that it almost burned my hand. I pulled back for a second, then gripped it again and turned. The door swung open silently, too silently, like the hinges had been oiled yesterday. The room beyond was dark, darker than it should have been. My flashlight beam seemed to get swallowed up by that darkness, barely illuminating a few feet in front of me. I stepped inside. The room was freezing. Colder than the hallway, colder than anywhere I'd been in the building. My breath came out in thick clouds, and I started shivering immediately despite my jacket. I swept my flashlight around, trying to get a sense of the space. It was just like the other residential rooms. Small, with a single bed, a dresser, a tiny bathroom visible through a doorway. But this room was different in one crucial way. It looked lived in. The bed was made, the sheets tucked in neatly despite being covered in dust. There were items on the dresser, a hairbrush, some coins, a glass that looked like it might still have water in it. On the nightstand, there was a book lying open, as if someone had just set it down to take a break from reading. I moved closer to the dresser, my flashlight illuminating the items. The coins were from the late 1980s. The hairbrush had strands of gray hair still caught in the bristles, and there was something else, a photograph in a tarnished frame. I picked it up, wiping the dust off the glass. The photo showed an old woman, probably in her 70s, sitting in a chair and smiling at the camera. She had kind eyes and a warm smile, wearing a floral dress that looked handmade. On the back of the frame, written in faded ink, Martha Hendricks, room 438, 1990. Martha Hendricks. I'd read about her when researching the hotel. She was one of the 3 people who died in the fire. She'd been a long-term resident, living at the Fairmont for almost 10 years before the fire. According to the news articles I'd found, she died of smoke inhalation in her room, unable to escape because of her age and limited mobility. I was standing in a dead woman's room, a room that had been sealed for 30 years, untouched since the fire that killed her. Except it didn't look untouched, it looked like someone was still living here. That's when I heard it. A sound from the bathroom. The sound of water running. I froze, my flashlight pointed at the bathroom door. The sound continued, steady and clear. Water running into a sink or bathtub. After a few seconds, it stopped. Then I heard something else. Footsteps. Slow, shuffling footsteps, like someone elderly having trouble walking. They were coming from inside the bathroom. I should have run. God, I should have run right then and there. But I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, my flashlight locked on that bathroom door, watching as the doorknob slowly started to turn. The door opened. There was nothing there. Just a small bathroom with a sink, toilet, and shower. Empty, but I could still hear the footsteps. They continued from the bathroom, moving into the room, passing right by me. I felt the air move as they passed, felt something brush against my arm, something soft and papery, like old skin. The footsteps moved to the bed. I watched, unable to look away, as the mattress compressed. A depression formed in the blanket, like someone had just sat down on the edge of the bed. The book on the nightstand moved, lifted by invisible hands, pages turning slowly. I found my voice. Martha, the pages stopped turning. The room went completely silent. Even the ambient sounds, the wind outside, the creaking of the building, everything stopped. It was like the entire world was holding its breath, waiting. Then I heard a voice, quiet, thin, like it was coming from very far away. Help me. The same words that had been written on the wall in room 217, but now they came with such sadness, such desperation, that I felt tears spring to my eyes. I don't understand, I said, and I was surprised at how steady my voice was. How can I help you? The book fell from the air, hitting the floor with a thud that seemed impossibly loud in the silence. The depression on the bed vanished as whatever was sitting there stood up. I felt it move past me again, that same soft brush against my arm, and the footsteps moved toward the door. They paused at the threshold, and I heard that voice again. Find me, tell them I'm still here. Then the footsteps continued out into the hallway, growing fainter as they moved away. I stood there in the freezing room, shaking, trying to process what had just happened. Find me, tell them I'm still here. It took me a while to work up the courage to leave room 438. When I finally did, I walked down the hallway in the direction the footsteps had gone. They'd stopped now, but I had a feeling I knew where they'd been heading. At the end of the hallway, there was a door marked, roof access. It was standing open, and I could see stairs leading upward. I climbed them, emerging onto the roof of the hotel. The roof was flat, covered in gravel and tar paper that had degraded over the years. There were vents and old air conditioning units scattered around, and a low wall around the perimeter. The view was depressing, abandoned buildings as far as I could see, streets empty except for a few cars. I walked to the edge and looked down, 7 stories to the ground. And there, near the wall, I saw something that made my heart stop. scratches in the tar paper. Deep gouges, like someone had been dragging their fingers across the surface, trying to hold on. They led right up to the edge of the wall. I looked down again, and this time I saw it. On the ground below, the faint outline of a shape in the overgrown weeds and debris. A shape about the size of a person. Martha Hendricks hadn't died in the fire. She'd died trying to escape it. She'd made it to the roof, overcome by smoke and panic, and she'd fallen, or jumped. And her body had lain there, in the weeds behind the hotel, undiscovered. The other two victims had been found in their rooms, but Martha, they'd assumed she was with them, that all three bodies had been recovered from the fourth floor. But she was still here, still waiting for someone to find her, still trying to tell her story. I left the hotel in a daze. When I got home, I spent hours researching, making phone calls, sending emails. I contacted the local police, the fire department, anyone who would listen. I told them about Martha Hendricks, about room 438, about what I'd found on the roof. It took 3 weeks of persistence, but finally, they agreed to check. A team went out to the hotel, searched the area behind the building where I'd told them to look, and they found her. Skeletal remains partially buried right where I'd seen that shape from the roof. The news reported it as a tragic discovery, a fire victim whose body had gone unrecovered for 30 years. They returned her remains to her family, what little family she had left, a nephew she hadn't seen in decades. She got a proper burial, a grave marker, a place in the world that acknowledged she'd existed and mattered. I like to think she's at rest now, that she got what she needed, to be found, to be remembered, to be laid to rest with dignity. But sometimes, late at night, I wonder if she's really gone, or if she's still there, still waiting in room 438, still sitting on the edge of that bed with her book. I've never gone back to the Fairmont Hotel. I don't think I could. But I drive past it sometimes when I'm in that part of the city. And sometimes, when I do, I look up at the fourth floor, at the window that must be room 438. And sometimes, I swear I see a light in that window. Just for a second. Just long enough to make me wonder. The hotel is scheduled for demolition next year. They're finally going to tear it down, build something new. Part of me is relieved. Part of me thinks it's for the best, that some places are too stained by sadness to be saved. But part of me worries. Because if Martha was still there, still waiting, still trying to tell her story, what happens to her when the building comes down? Where does she go? I don't have an answer to that. I don't think anyone does. All I know is that I learned something important at the Fairmont Hotel. The dead don't always move on. Sometimes they stay, trapped by circumstance or trauma, or simply the need to be found, to be acknowledged, to matter. And sometimes, if you listen carefully enough, you can hear them, calling out from the darkness, still here, still waiting, always waiting. There are places in this world that collect darkness the way some buildings collect water damage. They soak it in, layer after layer, year after year, until the darkness becomes part of the structure itself. The Blackwood Sanatorium was one of those places, and I should have known better than to go there alone, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning. My name is irrelevant. What matters is that in the summer of 2022, I was working on a photography project documenting abandoned medical facilities across the Northeast. I'd already shot 3 hospitals and 2 nursing homes, and my work was getting attention. A gallery in Boston was interested in showing the collection. The Blackwood Sanatorium was supposed to be my crown jewel, the centerpiece of the exhibition. The sanatorium was built in 1902 as a tuberculosis hospital. It sat on 200 acres of forest in rural Vermont, isolated from the nearest town by miles of winding dirt roads. The isolation was intentional, tuberculosis was highly contagious, and facilities like Blackwood were designed to keep patients away from the general population while they underwent treatment. Treatment in those days was brutal. Fresh air, rest, and a procedure called pneumothorax that involved collapsing a patient's lung to give it time to heal. Many patients never left Blackwood alive. The cemetery on the grounds holds over 2,000 bodies. The facility closed in 1962 when antibiotics made places like Blackwood obsolete. It sat empty for a few years before being repurposed as a psychiatric hospital. That lasted until 1989, when it closed permanently amid allegations of patient abuse. It had been abandoned ever since, slowly rotting in the Vermont woods. I arrived on a Tuesday in late August. The weather was perfect, sunny, warm, with that crisp edge that promised autumn wasn't far away. I'd been given directions by another photographer who'd shot the place a year earlier. The property was technically off limits, posted with no trespassing signs, but like most abandoned locations, it wasn't actively patrolled. The local police had better things to do than chase away photographers and urban explorers. The road to Blackwood was barely a road anymore, more like a suggestion of where a road used to be. My car bounced and scraped over roots and rocks, and I was genuinely worried about my suspension by the time the building came into view. It was massive. A sprawling complex of interconnected buildings, 4 stories tall in the center with 2 long wings extending out on either side. It was built in the Kirkbride plan, a popular design for psychiatric hospitals in the late 1800s and early 1900s. The idea was that the layout, long wings for patients, administrative center in the middle, would provide good air circulation and natural light. In practice, it created a labyrinth. The building was in rough shape. Windows were broken, the roof sagged in places, and vegetation was starting to reclaim the lower levels. But it was still imposing, still beautiful in its way. I grabbed my camera equipment and made my way to the main entrance. The front doors were chained shut, but I'd expected that. I walked around the perimeter until I found what I was looking for, a window with the bars pried off, the glass long since broken. It was low enough to climb through with only minor difficulty. I found myself in what had once been a patient common room. There were still chairs arranged in a circle, as if waiting for a group therapy session that would never come. The wallpaper was peeling, revealing layers underneath, floral patterns from different eras, each one faded and water-stained. I set up my tripod and started shooting. The light coming through the broken windows was perfect, creating these dramatic shafts of illumination cutting through the dust. I worked methodically, the way I always did, documenting each room before moving on to the next. The common room led to a hallway lined with patient rooms. I checked each one, taking photos of the iron bed frames still bolted to the floors, the small windows with their heavy bars, the bathrooms with their ancient fixtures. In one room, I found children's drawings still taped to the wall, crude crayon pictures of houses and families in sunshine. That hit me harder than I expected. I'd known intellectually that Blackwood had housed children during its psychiatric hospital days, but seeing evidence of it was different. I spent about 2 hours working through the first floor of the East Wing. By then, it was early afternoon, and I was making good progress. I decided to head up to the second floor, where the more severe cases had been housed according to the research I'd done. The stairwell was dark, the windows either boarded up or so filthy that they barely let any light through. I pulled out my flashlight and started climbing. The stairs were solid enough, though they creaked under my weight. Graffiti covered the walls. Names, dates, crude drawings, the usual stuff you find in abandoned buildings. But there was a piece of graffiti that made me pause. Written in what looked like black spray paint, in letters at least 2 feet tall. Turn back, below it in smaller letters. They're still here. They're always here. I took a photo of it. Urban explorers love to leave dramatic warnings. It's part of the culture, part of the mystique of abandoned places. I figured it was just someone trying to scare future visitors, maybe stake a claim to having been there first. I should have listened to it. The second floor was worse than the first. The decay was more advanced, the smell was stronger, that combination of mold and rot and something else, something organic and wrong. The patient rooms here were smaller, more cell-like. Many still had the leather restraints attached to the beds. In one room, I found a straitjacket hanging from a hook on the wall, the canvas yellowed and brittle with age. I was setting up a shot of the straitjacket when I heard it, a sound from deeper in the building. A voice, singing. It was faint, barely audible, but it was definitely there. A woman's voice, singing something slow and melancholy. I couldn't make out the words, but the melody was haunting, beautiful in a sad way. I stood there, camera forgotten, listening. The singing continued for maybe 30 seconds, then stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was complete. "Hello?" I called out. My voice echoed down the hallway, bouncing off walls and closed doors. No response. I told myself it was probably just wind whistling through broken windows, or the building settling, or any number of mundane explanations. Sound does weird things in empty buildings. But I'd been doing this for years, and I'd never heard wind that sounded quite like singing before. I packed up my equipment and moved deeper into the second floor, following the direction the singing had come from. The hallway stretched ahead of me, doors on either side, most of them closed. The light was dimmer here, farther from the windows, and I had to use my flashlight to see clearly. I was about halfway down the hall when I noticed something odd. One of the doors, the one to room 237, was different from the others. While the other doors were covered in graffiti and water stains, this one was clean. Not just cleaner than the others, but completely pristine, like it had been painted yesterday. I approached it slowly, my camera ready. The door was closed, and there was something written on it in neat, precise handwriting. Observation room, authorized personnel only. I tried the handle. It turned easily, too easily, and the door swung open without a sound. The room beyond was not like the others I'd seen. It was larger, for one thing, and it was divided in half by a wall of glass. One-way glass, the kind used for observation. On one side was a small room with a chair and a desk, clearly meant for observers. On the other side was a padded cell. The padded cell was in remarkably good condition. The padding was still intact, still white, though it should have been rotted and stained after decades of abandonment. There were straps on the walls, restraints positioned at various heights, meant to hold a person in place. And in the center of the floor there was a stain, a dark brown stain that could only be one thing. I raised my camera and started shooting, but something felt wrong. The room was too cold. I could see my breath in the air. And there was a smell, faint but distinct, antiseptic. The sharp, chemical smell of a hospital, completely at odds with the decay and rot that permeated the rest of the building. That's when I saw her. She was standing in the padded cell facing the corner, a woman in a hospital gown, her back to me, her dark hair hanging long and lank down her back. She was completely still, not moving, not breathing, just standing there. I froze. My finger was still on the camera shutter, but I couldn't press it. I couldn't move at all, because I absolutely knew, that she hadn't been there when I opened the door. I'd looked into that cell, and it had been empty. Hello? My voice came out as a whisper. The woman didn't respond, didn't move, just stood there, facing the corner. I tried again, louder this time. Are you okay? Do you need help? Still nothing. And then, slowly, she began to turn around. I didn't wait to see her face. I backed out of the room, grabbed my tripod, and ran. I didn't care about being quiet or careful. I just ran, back down the hallway, toward the stairwell, my equipment banging against my legs as I moved. Behind me, I heard a door slam, then another. Like dominoes falling, every door in the hallway slammed shut one after another, the sound chasing me down the corridor. I burst into the stairwell and practically threw myself down the stairs. I was halfway to the first floor when I heard footsteps above me. Running footsteps, coming down fast. I hit the first floor and ran through the common room toward the window I'd climbed through. The footsteps followed, getting closer. I could hear breathing now, ragged and desperate, like someone who'd been running for miles. I got to the window and started climbing through. My camera bag caught on the frame, and I had to stop, precious seconds wasted as I worked it free. The footsteps were in the common room now. I could hear them clearly, along with that breathing, and something else. A whimpering sound, like someone crying. I got through the window and fell onto the ground outside. I didn't look back. I ran for my car, threw my equipment in the back seat, and started the engine. Only then did I look back at the building. Every window on the second floor was filled with faces, dozens of them, pale, pressed against the glass, watching me. Some were young, some were old. Some looked peaceful, others looked terrified, but they all had one thing in common: they were all staring at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I drove away fast, my car bouncing dangerously over the rutted road. I didn't slow down until I was back on paved road miles from Blackwood, back in the world of the living. I didn't go home right away. I couldn't. I was shaking too badly to drive safely, so I pulled into a rest stop and sat there for an hour trying to calm down. Eventually, I gathered myself enough to check my camera. I'd taken maybe 50 photos before I ran. I scrolled through them on the camera's display screen, and most of them were exactly what I'd expected. Documentation of decay, empty rooms, abandoned furniture, but when I got to the photos I'd taken of the observation room, my blood ran cold. The woman was in every shot. Every single one. But she was in different positions. In the first photo, she was standing in the corner like I'd seen her. In the second, she was closer to the glass. In the third, closer still. By the fifth photo, she was pressed up against the glass, her face filling the frame. And I could see her face clearly now. It was wrong. Her mouth was open too wide, impossibly wide, and her eyes were completely black. Her hands were pressed against the glass, and I could see that her fingers were wrong too long, with too many joints. The last photo in the sequence wasn't of the observation room at all. I don't remember taking it, don't remember pointing my camera in that direction. But there was a photo of me, taken from behind, showing me standing in the observation room, looking through the glass. Something had been standing behind me, taking my picture. I deleted every photo from Blackwood. Then I formatted the memory card, just to be sure. I drove home, packed up all my research on the sanatorium, and burned it in my fireplace. I withdrew from the gallery exhibition, told them I was dealing with personal issues and couldn't complete the project. For weeks after, I had nightmares. I'd dream I was back in Blackwood, wandering the hallways, looking for a way out. But every exit led deeper into the building, and behind me, I could hear footsteps, running footsteps, and singing. Always that sad, beautiful singing. The nightmares eventually faded, but I never went back to abandoned places. I couldn't. Every time I thought about it, I'd remember those faces in the windows, all those patients who never left Blackwood, who were trapped there still, waiting. About 6 months after my visit, I was scrolling through an urban exploration forum when I saw a post that made my heart stop. Someone else had visited Blackwood. They posted photos, and in the background of one photo, a shot of the common room where I'd entered, I could see something that made me close my laptop and walk away. A camera bag, my camera bag, still sitting on the floor where I must have left it in my panic to escape. But I hadn't left it. I'd taken it with me. I remembered throwing it in my car. I'd unpacked it at home, taken out all the equipment, checked everything. Except, as I sat there, trying to remember, I realized I couldn't picture my camera bag clearly, couldn't remember what it looked like. And when I went to my closet to check, to prove to myself that it was there, I found my equipment scattered on shelves and in drawers, but no bag. Had I left it? Had I imagined taking it with me? The memory was fuzzy now, uncertain, and that's what scared me most. Not the woman in the observation room, not the faces in the windows, but the way Blackwood had gotten into my head, had started to change my memories, make me doubt what I knew to be true. I've thought a lot about Blackwood over the past few years, about what it was, what it might still be. I think places like that, places where so much suffering occurred, where so many people died alone and afraid, I think they hold on to something. Some residue of all that pain and fear and desperation, and I think sometimes that residue becomes something more. Something that reaches out, that draws people in, that feeds on fear and uncertainty. Something that doesn't want to be abandoned, to be forgotten. The forum post about Blackwood stayed up for a few days, then disappeared. I tried to contact the person who posted it, but their account had been deleted. I don't know if they got out. I don't know if anyone who goes there gets out. Not really. Not in any way that matters. Because here's the thing I've realized: you can leave a place like Blackwood. You can drive away, go back to your normal life, tell yourself it was nothing, just an abandoned building and an overactive imagination. But Blackwood doesn't leave you. I still hear the singing sometimes, late at night when I'm alone. That same sad, beautiful melody coming from somewhere I can't quite pinpoint. And sometimes, when I'm in a crowded place, a restaurant, a store, anywhere with lots of people, I'll catch a glimpse of a face in the crowd. A pale face with too wide mouth and black eyes watching me from across the room. And I know that Blackwood is still there, 200 acres of forest in rural Vermont, slowly being reclaimed by nature. The building is still standing, though probably more decayed now than when I saw it. The patient rooms are still there, the observation room, the padded cells, all of it waiting. And the patients are still there too. Still waiting for something, release, recognition, revenge, I don't know. But they're there, I'm certain of it. Standing at the windows, walking the hallways, singing their sad songs in the dark. Sometimes I think about going back, not to take photos, not to explore, but to understand, to figure out what Blackwood really is, what's keeping all those people there, what it wants. But I never will. Because I learned something important during those few hours at Blackwood Sanatorium. Some places are abandoned for a reason. Some doors, once opened, can never really be closed. Some darkness, once you've touched it, becomes part of you forever. The Blackwood Sanatorium is scheduled for demolition. Has been for years now, actually, but it keeps getting delayed. Budget issues, environmental concerns, legal complications. It's almost like the building doesn't want to come down. Like it's fighting to stay standing, to keep its secrets, to hold on to its residents. Part of me hopes they never demolish it. That they leave it standing in those Vermont woods, a monument to suffering and a warning to the curious. A reminder that some places are meant to be forgotten, some histories are better left buried. But part of me knows that demolishing it wouldn't matter. The building is just wood and brick and concrete. What lives in Blackwood isn't tied to the physical structure. It's something deeper, something that's soaked into the ground itself, into the very air of that place. You can tear down the building, but you can't tear down the darkness. And the darkness will still be there, waiting in those woods, long after the last wall has fallen and the last beam has rotted away. Waiting for someone curious enough or foolish enough to go looking for it. I just hope that someone isn't you. But if you do go, if you find yourself on that overgrown road, bouncing over roots and rocks, getting your first glimpse of that massive Victorian structure through the trees, I have one piece of advice. When you hear the singing, don't follow it. When you see the clean door among the filthy ones, don't open it. And when you feel that presence behind you, that thing that shouldn't be there, taking your picture while you're taking pictures of its home, run. Run fast and don't look back. Because if you do look back, you might see what I saw in those windows. All those faces, all those lost souls, all that accumulated suffering and darkness. And once you've seen it, once it knows you've seen it, it never really lets you go. I know. Because I'm still seeing those faces. Still hearing that singing. Still finding traces of Blackwood in my everyday life. A smell that shouldn't be there. A shadow that moves wrong. A feeling of being watched when I'm alone. Blackwood marked me that day. Put its fingerprints on my soul. And I think In some way I don't fully understand, I'm still there. A part of me never left that observation room, never climbed out that window, never drove away. A part of me is still standing in front of that one-way glass, looking into that padded cell, watching as the woman in the corner slowly turns around to show me her face. And she's still turning. Even now, all these years later, she's still turning. And one day, maybe tomorrow, maybe 10 years from now, maybe on my deathbed, she's going to finish turning around, and I'm going to see what she really is. God help me, I'm going to see, and then I'll understand. I'll understand what Blackwood really is. What it's been trying to tell me all this time, what all those patients with their pale faces pressed against the glass have been waiting to show me. I'll understand. And I think when that moment comes, I'll wish I'd never stepped through that window, never climbed those stairs, never opened that door. But it's too late for wishes now. It was too late the moment I set foot on Blackwood's grounds. Some doors, once you open them, can never be closed. And some darkness, once you invite it in, never leaves. Never. I've always believed that children leave an imprint on places they inhabit. Their laughter, their tears, their endless energy, it all seeps into the walls somehow. But what happens when those children suffer, when they're abandoned, neglected, afraid? What kind of imprint does that leave? The Riverside Orphanage taught me the answer to that question, and I wish to God it hadn't. This happened in the fall of 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic. I was stuck at home like everyone else, going crazy from isolation, scrolling through Urbex forums late at night when I should have been sleeping. That's when I found the post about Riverside. The orphanage had closed in 1978 after a scandal involving the director and several staff members. Abuse, neglect, children going missing. The details were murky, buried under decades of bureaucratic red tape and sealed records. What was clear was that the place had a dark history, and it had been sitting empty ever since. Too contaminated by its past for anyone to want to renovate or demolish it. The building was located about 2 hours from where I lived, in a small town that had seen better days. The whole area was economically depressed, full of shuttered factories and boarded-up storefronts. The orphanage sat on the outskirts of town, a 3-story brick building overlooking a river that had probably been scenic once but was now brown and sluggish. I made the drive on a Saturday in October. The weather was perfect for exploring, overcast, cool, with that particular quality of light that makes everything look slightly unreal. I parked my car in an abandoned gas station about half a mile away and walked to the orphanage, my backpack heavy with camera equipment, flashlights, and supplies. The building was surrounded by an overgrown yard, what had probably been a playground at some point. I could see the rusted remains of a swing set, the chains hanging empty and swaying slightly in the breeze even though there was no wind. That should have been my first warning, but I was too focused on getting inside to pay attention. The front entrance was boarded up, but I'd expected that. I walked around the perimeter until I found what I was looking for, a basement window with the boards pried off, likely by other explorers. I climbed through, dropping down into the darkness below. My flashlight cut through the gloom, revealing a basement that looked like it had been used for storage. There were boxes everywhere, most of them rotted and collapsed, their contents spilled across the concrete floor. Old files, clothing, toys, all of it water-damaged and moldy, forgotten remnants of lives that had passed through this place. I found the stairs leading up to the main floor and climbed them carefully, testing each step before putting my weight on it. The door at the top was unlocked, and I pushed it open to reveal a long hallway. The main floor was institutional in that particular way that buildings from the 1960s often are, linoleum floors, cinder block walls painted in ugly beige, fluorescent light fixtures hanging dark and dead from the ceiling. There were doorways along both sides of the hall, most of them open, revealing glimpses of the rooms beyond. I started exploring systematically, documenting each room with my camera. There was an office area, filing cabinets tipped over and papers scattered everywhere, a kitchen with ancient appliances and a walk-in freezer that I absolutely refused to open, a dining hall with long tables and benches, places set at some of them as if waiting for children who would never come. And then I found the dormitories. The first one I entered was clearly for the younger children. There were small beds lined up in rows, maybe 20 of them, each with a rusted metal frame. The mattresses were long gone, but the frames remained, bolted to the floor. Above each bed was a number painted on the wall. Not names, numbers. Like the children had been inventory rather than people. I took photos, trying to ignore the growing sense of unease in my gut. There was something wrong about this room, something that went beyond the obvious sadness of abandoned children's beds. The air felt heavy, oppressive, like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm. I moved to the next dormitory, this one for older children. The beds were larger, but otherwise it was the same Rows of empty frames, numbers on the walls, that same oppressive atmosphere. I was setting up a shot when I heard it, a child's laughter. I froze, my camera halfway to my face. The laughter came again, high and clear, echoing from somewhere deeper in the building. It sounded joyful, carefree, completely at odds with the grim surroundings. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded too loud in the silence that followed. "Is someone there?" No answer. But the laughter came again, and this time I could tell it was coming from upstairs, from the 3rd floor. Every instinct I had told me to leave, to pack up my gear and climb back out that basement window and never look back. But curiosity, that damned curiosity that's gotten me into trouble more times than I can count, drove me forward. I found the stairs and started climbing. The 2nd floor was more dormitories, more empty beds with numbers instead of names. I passed through quickly, following the sound of laughter up to the 3rd floor. The stairs here were in worse shape, the banister missing in places, the wood soft and creaking under my feet. The 3rd floor was different from the others. Instead of open dormitories, there were individual rooms, small cell-like spaces with heavy doors. Some of the doors still had locks on them, locks on the outside. The laughter had stopped. The silence was total, pressing against my eardrums like physical pressure. I walked down the hallway slowly, shining my light into each cell as I passed. They were all empty, most of them bare except for a bed frame and sometimes a small chair. Then I reached the last room on the left, room 13. The door was closed, and unlike the others, it looked like it was in good condition. The number 13 was painted on it in red, the only colored number I'd seen in the entire building. Everything else had been black or white, but this was red. Bright, vivid red that looked fresh despite decades of abandonment. I reached for the doorknob. It was cold, so cold that it made my hand ache. I turned it, and the door swung open. The room beyond was not empty. There was a boy sitting on the bed. He looked about 10 years old, wearing clothes that seemed out of place. Gray wool shorts, a white shirt, suspenders. His hair was neatly combed, parted on the side. He was looking down at something in his hands, and as I watched, I realized he was playing with a wooden toy car, rolling it back and forth on his knee. "Hey," I said, my voice coming out as a whisper. "Are you okay? What are you doing here?" The boy didn't look up. He just kept playing with his car, rolling it back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. I could hear the sound it made now, a soft creaking as the wheels turned. I took a step into the room. "Do you need help? Are you lost?" That's when he looked up, and I saw his face. His eyes were wrong. Not just the color or the shape. Everything about them was wrong. They were too large, too dark, and they didn't reflect any light from my flashlight. It was like looking into 2 pools of absolute darkness, bottomless and hungry. He smiled at me. His teeth were too many, too sharp. "Do you want to play?" he asked. His voice was strange, layered like several children speaking at once. I backed out of the room, my heart hammering in my chest. The boy didn't move from the bed, didn't follow me. He just sat there, rolling his toy car back and forth, that smile never leaving his face. I turned and ran. I made it maybe 10 feet down the hallway before I heard the doors start to open. All of them, every cell on the 3rd floor, opening simultaneously with a chorus of creaking hinges. And then I heard them. Footsteps. Dozens of footsteps, small feet running across linoleum floors. They were coming from the rooms. All of them. Pouring out into the hallway behind me, a stampede of children who shouldn't exist, who couldn't exist. I didn't look back. I just ran, heading for the stairs, my equipment banging against my back as I moved. The laughter started again. But now it wasn't joyful, it was mocking, cruel. It echoed through the hallway, bouncing off the walls, surrounding me. And underneath it I could hear other sounds. Crying, whimpering, screaming. I hit the stairs and practically fell down them, grabbing the railing to keep from tumbling headfirst. The footsteps followed, never quite catching me but never falling behind either. Always there, always just around the corner, just out of sight. I burst onto the 2nd floor and ran for the next stairwell. As I passed the dormitories, I made the mistake of looking inside. Every bed was occupied now. Children lying motionless, their faces turned toward the doorway, toward me. Some of them looked normal enough. Just kids, sleeping peacefully. But others were wrong. Twisted. Their limbs at impossible angles, their faces stretched and distorted, their eyes open and staring in black like the boy in room 13. I tore my gaze away and kept running, down to the 1st floor, through the dining hall, following the path I'd taken on the way in. The footsteps behind me multiplied, grew louder. I could hear breathing now, dozens of children breathing in unison, a sound like wind through a tunnel. The basement door was ahead. I yanked it open and plunged down the stairs, taking them 3 at a time. I could see the window I'd climbed through, gray daylight filtering in, promising escape. I was almost there when something grabbed my ankle. I looked down and saw a hand, small, pale, impossibly strong, wrapped around my leg. I kicked frantically, and my foot connected with something solid. The grip released, and I scrambled forward, diving through the window and out into the overgrown grass of the yard. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. Once inside, doors locked, I sat there shaking, trying to catch my breath, trying to process what had just happened. That's when I noticed my backpack. It was lighter than it should be. I opened it with trembling hands and found that my camera was gone. My main camera, the expensive one I'd been using to document the dormitories, I'd left it behind, in room 13. On the floor where I dropped it when I saw the boy's face, there was no way, absolutely no way, I was going back for it. I drove away from Riverside Orphanage and didn't look back. It wasn't until I got home, several hours later, that I remembered I had my phone with me. I'd taken a few shots with it before switching to my main camera. I pulled up the photos with shaking hands, scrolling through images of the basement, the hallways, the dormitories, and then I got to the last photo I'd taken, a wide shot of one of the dormitory rooms, showing the rows of empty beds. Except they weren't empty in the photo. Every single bed had a child in it. Pale children with dark eyes, all of them sitting up, all of them looking directly at the camera, at me. Their faces were expressionless, but there was something in those black eyes, recognition, hunger, something ancient and patient and cruel. I deleted the photo immediately, then I deleted all the photos from Riverside, then I factory reset my phone, just to be sure. For weeks after, I had nightmares. I'd dream I was back in the orphanage, walking through those hallways, and the children would come out of their rooms. They'd surround me, silent and patient, their dark eyes fixed on my face. And one of them, the boy from room 13, would hold up something for me to see. My camera. He'd smile that terrible smile and ask, "Do you want to play?" I'd wake up gasping, covered in sweat, checking the shadows in my room to make sure I was alone. The nightmares faded eventually, but I never forgot Riverside. I looked into its history, digging through old newspaper archives and public records. What I found made my blood run cold. In 1963, 15 years before the orphanage closed, there was an incident. A fire broke out on the third floor in the isolation wing where troubled children were kept. The official report said it was an accident, a faulty heater. But there were whispers that the fire had been set deliberately by one of the staff members who'd been abusing the children. 13 children died in that fire. Their names were never released, their bodies never properly identified. They were buried in unmarked graves in the cemetery behind the orphanage, numbered rather than named. 13 children. Room 13. I think about those children sometimes, about what they suffered in life and what they became in death. I think about that boy with his toy car, his too dark eyes, his too sharp smile. I think about all those pale faces in the beds, watching, waiting. Waiting for what? For someone to find them? To remember them? To join them? I don't know, and I hope I never find out. But sometimes, late at night, I hear it. That sound of wooden wheels rolling back and forth across the linoleum. Back and forth. Back and forth. And I know, somehow, that the boy from room 13 is still playing with his toy car, still waiting in that cell, still asking anyone who'll listen, "Do you want to play?" And the worst part, the part that keeps me awake at night, is that I left something of mine in that room, my camera, with my name on it, my fingerprints, my essence in some strange way. I gave them a connection to me, and connections work both ways. I've moved twice since visiting Riverside, different cities, different apartments. But it doesn't matter. Sometimes I'll come home and find my belongings moved slightly, a book on a different shelf, a chair pulled out from the table, small things. Things that could be explained away as forgetfulness or coincidence. But then, a few months ago, I found something that couldn't be explained away. I woke up one morning and went to make coffee. On my kitchen table, placed carefully in the center, was a toy car. A wooden toy car with wheels that creaked when they turned. It wasn't mine. I've never owned anything like it. But I recognized it immediately. I didn't touch it. I couldn't. I left it there, went to work, tried to pretend I'd imagined it. When I came home that evening, it was gone. But now, sometimes, when the apartment is quiet and I'm alone, I hear it. That soft creaking sound of wooden wheels rolling back and forth. And I know he's found me. The boy from room 13, he's found his way out of that orphanage, followed the connection I gave him, and now he's here, playing, waiting. And one night, I know I'm going to wake up and see him sitting at the foot of my bed, rolling that toy car back and forth on his knee, his dark eyes fixed on me, his sharp teeth visible as he smiles and asks, "Do you want to play?" And when that night comes, I don't know if I'll have a choice. I don't know if I've had a choice since the moment I walked into room 13 and left a piece of myself behind. The children of Riverside Orphanage were forgotten in life, erased in death, reduced to numbers instead of names. And maybe that's what they're looking for now, someone to remember them. Someone to acknowledge that they existed, that they mattered, that they suffered. Or maybe they're just looking for someone to join them, to fill one of those empty beds, to become another number on the wall, to stay forever in that place of suffering and darkness. I don't know which is worse. All I know is that I should never have gone to Riverside. Should never have climbed through that basement window, never walked those hallways, never opened the door to room 13. Because some doors once opened can never be fully closed, some connections once made can never be broken, and some children, once forgotten, will do anything to be remembered again. They say prisons absorb violence the way sponges absorb water. Every act of cruelty, every moment of rage, every death, it all seeps into the concrete and steel, becoming part of the foundation. Pinewood Prison had over a century of violence to absorb, and by the time I walked through its gates, it was saturated. I was 26 when this happened, working as a freelance journalist doing a piece on the privatization of prisons. Pinewood had closed 2 years earlier in 2018, shut down after decades of overcrowding, gang violence, and riots. There were stories about corruption, guards turning blind eyes to prisoner abuse, inmates disappearing into solitary confinement, and never coming out the same. My editor wanted me to get inside, get photos, get the story that newspapers couldn't or wouldn't tell. I knew a guy who knew a guy, and for $300 cash, I got access to a side gate and 4 hours before the security company did their evening rounds. Pinewood was a sprawling complex in the middle of nowhere, 200 acres of razor wire, guard towers, and cell blocks. The main building was a massive concrete structure, 5 stories tall, with wings radiating out from a central control hub. It looked like a concrete spider crouched and waiting. I arrived at sunset on a Tuesday in June. The heat was oppressive, the kind that makes the air shimmering thick. The guy I paid met me at the service gate, let me through, told me to be out by 8 p.m. sharp, and left. I was alone. The main entrance was a gaping mouth of darkness. The doors had been chained open, probably by salvagers who'd already stripped the place of anything valuable. I clicked on my flashlight and walked inside. The entrance area was a checkpoint, with metal detectors that had been torn out and desks that had been overturned. There was graffiti everywhere, the usual tags and curses, but also stranger things, symbols I didn't recognize, words and languages I couldn't identify, and counting marks. Hundreds of counting marks scratched into the concrete walls, like someone had been tracking days, or deaths, or something worse. I moved deeper into the prison, following signs towards cell block C. The hallways were narrow, oppressive, designed to channel movement and prevent escape. Every surface was concrete or steel, nothing soft, nothing welcoming. The air smelled like rust and mildew and something else, something organic that I tried not to think about. Cell block C was massive. 5 tiers of cells, each one maybe 8 by 10 feet, stacked on top of each other and stretching into the distance. The cells were all open now, their doors hanging on broken hinges or removed entirely. I stood on the ground floor, looking up at the tiers above me, and felt a crushing sense of despair. Hundreds of men had lived here, trapped in those tiny boxes, year after year, some for decades. I started my work, photographing the cells, the common areas, the scrawled messages inmates had left on the walls. Death before dishonor. The block owns you. If you're reading this, I'm already dead. Cheerful stuff. About an hour in, I made my way up to the 3rd tier. The stairs were steel grating, and they rang hollowly under my feet. At the top, I found myself in a long corridor of cells. Most were empty, but some still had remnants of their occupants. Photos taped to walls, books left behind, clothing in piles. I was photographing one of these cells when I heard it, a voice. Deep, rough, coming from somewhere nearby. You shouldn't be here. I spun around, my heart in my throat. The corridor was empty. Just cells stretching in both directions, all of them open, all of them apparently vacant. Hello? I called out. Who's there? No answer. But I could feel it now, the sensation of being watched. That prickling awareness on the back of your neck that tells you you're not alone. I told myself it was just nerves, just my imagination feeding on the oppressive atmosphere of the prison. But I moved faster now, less thorough with my photos, eager to finish and get out. That's when I reached cell 347. The door to this cell was different from the others. It was closed, and it looked newer, like it had been replaced at some point. There was something written on it in white paint. Isolation, extreme caution. I knew about isolation cells. Solitary confinement, where inmates were sent as punishment. I'd read about them in my research, windowless concrete boxes where prisoners were kept for 23 hours a day, sometimes for months or years. They were known to drive people mad, to break them psychologically in ways that could never be repaired. I should have walked past it, should have left it alone. But I was a journalist, and this was exactly the kind of thing my editor wanted, evidence of the brutal conditions, the inhumane treatment. I tried the door, it was locked, but the lock was old and corroded. I worked at it with a pry bar I'd brought for exactly this purpose, and after a few minutes it gave way with a screech of metal on metal. The door swung open, and a wave of cold air rushed out. Not just cool, cold, like the air from a freezer. In the middle of June, in a building without power, there was no reason for it to be that cold. I shone my flashlight inside. The cell was tiny, maybe 6 by 8 feet. There was a concrete slab for a bed, a steel toilet, and nothing else. The walls were covered in scratch marks, not just a few, but thousands of them, covering every inch of the concrete. Some formed words, barely legible. Help me. Let me out. I'm sorry. And in a corner facing the wall was a figure. My flashlight caught it, and for a moment I couldn't process what I was seeing. It was a man, or had been. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit, sitting with his legs crossed, his back to me, perfectly still. Hey, I said, my voice shaking. Hey, you can't be in here. The prison's closed. You need to leave. The figure didn't move. Didn't respond. I could see now that something was wrong with him. The way he was sitting was unnatural. His spine curved at an angle that looked painful. His head tilted too far to one side. I took a step into the cell. Sir, are you okay? Do you need help? That's when he moved. It wasn't a normal movement. He didn't stand up or turn around. His head just rotated, all the way around, a full 180 degrees, until he was looking at me while his body remained facing the wall. His face was gray, the skin hanging loose, like old leather. His eyes were open, but they were milky and dead. His mouth hung slack, and I could see that his tongue was swollen and black. And then he smiled. That dead mouth stretched into a grin that was too wide, too impossible, and he spoke in a voice like grinding concrete. Finally, someone to talk to. I ran. I slammed into the doorframe in my panic, fell to my knees, scrambled back up, and ran. Behind me, I heard the sound of movement, something dragging across the floor, heavy and slow but deliberate. I made it to the stairs and started down, my feet barely touching the steps. I could hear it following me, that dragging sound punctuated by wet, rasping breaths. I risked a glance back and wished I hadn't. The thing from cell 347 was in the corridor behind me, pulling itself forward with arms that bent the wrong way, its lower body dragging behind it like dead weight. Its head was still turned backward, that nightmare smile still plastered across its gray face, its dead eyes locked on me. I hit the ground floor and ran through cell block C, heading for the exit. But something was wrong. The prison had changed. The hallways I'd walked through earlier were different now, longer, twisting in directions that didn't make sense. Doors that had been open were now closed. Walls seemed closer together, closing in. I turned a corner and found myself in a different cell block. Cell block D, according to the signs. But I hadn't been in D, I'd been in C, and the exit should have been straight ahead. The layout didn't make sense. Behind me, that dragging sound continued. Steady, patient, getting closer. I chose a direction at random and ran. The cell block opened into a common area, and I stopped dead. There were people here, dozens of them. Inmates in orange jumpsuits, sitting at tables, standing against walls, lying on bunks. All of them perfectly still. All of them watching me with dead, milky eyes. Looking for the exit? One of them asked. His voice was the same as the thing from cell 347, like gravel being crushed. There is no exit. Not anymore. Another one laughed, a sound like metal scraping on concrete. You're ours now. Another number, another body, another voice in the walls. They started to move toward me, their movements slow and wrong, limbs bending at impossible angles, heads tilting too far, mouths stretching into those too wide smiles. I backed away, looking for another route. There, a door marked administration. I ran for it, shouldered through, and found myself in a different section of the prison. Offices empty now, papers scattered everywhere. I kept moving, following signs, trying to find my way back to the entrance. The dragging sound was behind me again. Not just one now, several. A chorus of heavy bodies being pulled across linoleum floors, accompanied by wet breathing and that terrible laughter. I burst through a door and found myself in the prison yard. Open air, the sky above me turning purple with dusk. I could see the outer wall, maybe 200 yards away. Beyond it, freedom. I ran for it. The yard was empty, bare concrete and razor wire and the skeletal remains of basketball hoops. My footsteps echoed across the open space, and I became aware of something. The dragging sounds had stopped. The laughing had stopped. Everything was silent. I was halfway across the yard when I realized why. They weren't behind me anymore. They were ahead of me. Lined up along the wall, blocking my path, dozens of them, hundreds. Dead inmates with their gray faces and milky eyes and impossible smiles, all of them standing perfectly still, watching me run toward them. I skidded to a stop, turned to run the other way, and saw more of them, pouring out of the cell blocks, filling the yard, surrounding me. The circle was closing, tightening, drawing me toward its center, where the thing from cell 347 stood waiting, its head still turned backward, its arms reaching out toward me. "Welcome home," it said, and all the others said it with him, a chorus of grinding voices. "Welcome to Pinewood. You'll never leave. None of us do. We're all here forever, forever." They closed in, and I felt hands on me, cold, dead hands, too many to count, pulling me down, dragging me toward the cell blocks. I screamed and fought, but there were too many of them, and they were impossibly strong. I closed my eyes, waiting for whatever was coming, and that's when I heard it. A voice, different from the others. Human. Alive. "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" The hands released me. I opened my eyes and saw a security guard standing at the edge of the yard, his flashlight pointed at me. A real person. Living. Behind him, the sun was setting, painting the sky orange and red. The inmates were gone. All of them. Just gone, like they'd never been there. I was alone in the yard, lying on the concrete, covered in dirt and sweat and tears. The guard helped me up, started asking questions. Who was I? How did I get in? Did I know this was private property? I couldn't answer, couldn't speak. I just let him lead me to the gate, to my car, to safety. He gave me a citation for trespassing and told me if I came back, he'd have me arrested. I nodded, got in my car, and drove away. I never told him what I'd seen. What would be the point? He wouldn't believe me. I wouldn't have believed me. I never wrote the article. Told my editor I couldn't get access, that security was too tight. She was disappointed, but she moved on. Found another story, another journalist. But I couldn't move on. For months after, I had nightmares. I dreamed I was back in Pinewood, running through those hallways, chased by things that used to be human. And in every dream, I'd eventually realize something that made my blood freeze. I wasn't running anymore. I was one of them. Gray-faced, dead-eyed, dragging myself through the corridors, waiting for the next visitor, the next person foolish enough to walk through those gates. I started researching Pinewood's history obsessively, looking for answers. What I found was disturbing. Over the course of its 120-year operation, more than 800 inmates had died there. Fights, riots, disease, suicide, murder. Violence was a constant presence. But there were also the disappearances. Inmates who were listed as transferred to other facilities but whose records ended at Pinewood. Who never arrived at their supposed destinations. Who simply vanished. In cell 347, the isolation cell where I'd seen that thing, it had a particular history. In 1997, an inmate named Marcus Holloway was placed there for attacking a guard. He was supposed to be there for 30 days. But there was a clerical error, an oversight, and he was forgotten. By the time anyone remembered him, 6 months had passed. When they opened the cell, they found Marcus Holloway dead, his body in the same position I'd seen, sitting facing the corner. His spine curved unnaturally. The official cause of death was listed as dehydration and starvation, but the guards who found him told different stories. Stories about how the body was still warm, even though he'd been dead for weeks. About how his eyes followed them as they removed the corpse. About how they could hear scratching in that cell for months afterward, even when it was empty. Cell 347 was sealed after that, officially condemned due to structural issues, but the scratching continued. Inmates in neighboring cells reported hearing it, hearing voices whispering through the walls. Some of them went mad, had to be moved to psychiatric facilities. The entire isolation wing was eventually closed down, but now Pinewood itself is closed, abandoned, left to rot. And all those spirits, all those trapped souls, all that accumulated violence and suffering, it's still there, waiting in the darkness. Waiting for someone to walk through those gates, to wander those hallways, to open doors that should stay closed. I think about Marcus Holloway sometimes, about 6 months in isolation, forgotten, starving, going mad. About what that does to a person, what remains when the body finally gives out. I think about all those other inmates, the ones who died violently or disappeared mysteriously, and I think about that moment in the yard when they surrounded me, when they touched me with their cold, dead hands. Because here's the thing I haven't told anyone, the thing that keeps me awake at night when the security guard showed up and those spirits vanished. They didn't just disappear. I felt them go, felt them retreat, but not all of them left completely. Something stayed behind. Something small, something quiet, but definitely there. Since that night, I felt different, wrong. Like part of me is still in Pinewood, trapped in those hallways, while another part of me walked out and went on with my life. Sometimes I'll be going about my day and I'll realize I've lost time, minutes, sometimes hours, with no memory of where I've been or what I've done. And sometimes, late at night, I'll look in the mirror and my reflection will be slightly off, not much. Just a slight delay in its movements, like there's lag between my actions and its response. And in those moments, if I look closely, I can see it. My eyes are a little cloudier than they should be. My skin is a little grayer. My smile is a little too wide. I'm scared that one day I'll look in that mirror and see what Marcus Holloway became. I'll see those dead milky eyes looking back at me, and I'll realize that I never really left Pinewood at all. That the security guard who found me in that yard wasn't saving me. He was just telling a ghost to move along, to find somewhere else to haunt. Because maybe that's what Pinewood does. Maybe it doesn't just trap the people who die there. Maybe it takes a piece of everyone who enters, absorbs them the way it absorbed a century of violence, adds them to its collection of lost souls. And maybe, one day, I'll complete the transformation. I'll become another voice in those walls. Another set of footsteps dragging through empty corridors, another dead inmate waiting in the darkness for the next visitor. Waiting to welcome them home, waiting to tell them they'll never leave. Because no one ever really leaves Pinewood. They just take it with them when they go. Thank you for staying with me through these 5 true horror stories. I hope they kept your mind wandering just enough to drift into sleep, or maybe kept you awake a little longer than you expected. If you enjoyed tonight's episode, feel free to subscribe and join our growing late-night community. New stories, new encounters, and new mysteries will be waiting for you here every night. If you have a true horror story of your own, something you've never forgotten, you're welcome to share it in the comments. Your experience might be featured in a future episode, if you're brave enough to tell it. For now, let the quiet fill your room again. Let the darkness settle, and remember, the things we fear don't always disappear when the story ends. Sleep well, and until next time, good night. Tai.